If you spent any time in the trading card hobby recently, you've probably heard people say things like, the data says this card is undervalued, or the market is moving, or look at the card ladder graph, or the last comp was £500. And for a long time, I nodded along as if I understood exactly what that meant. But the truth is, I didn't. Or at least, I didn't understand it well enough to make consistently good decisions. Because having access to data and understanding data are two very different things. And that's what I want to talk about today. Not how to use every feature in Card Ladder, because they don't sponsor me yet. Not how to become an expert overnight. Just how to avoid making some really common mistakes. And these are the kind of mistakes that you see a lot on things like social media. People hyping up cards or talking down cards, and you can see that their understanding of the data is poor. Because after spending time looking at card markets and spending too much time on Instagram, I've realized something, which is most people don't have a data problem. Getting the data is not the problem. They have an interpretation problem. So let's start with most of us do. You search for a card, let's say, I don't know, a 2022 World Cup Prism-based Kylian Mbappe PSA 10. You find a recent sale, you see that it sold for £500, £250, whatever. And your brain immediately says, great, my card, my copy of the 2022 Prism-based Kylian Mbappe is worth that amount, £500, whatever the last sale was. But the problem is that one sale doesn't tell you what the market is doing. It tells you what one buyer paid one seller at one specific moment in time. That's it. Imagine I told you that somebody sold a house in London for £2 million or San Francisco for $4 million. Could you tell me what every house in London or San Francisco was worth? Of course not. You'd want more information, right? The first thing you'd want is multiple sales. You'd want trends, different areas. You'd want context. And trading cards are exactly the same. So one of the first lessons that I've learned is that a single sale is a data point, but a market is many sales, and those are not the same thing. So when I look for a card now, or I'm looking to price my own cards, the first question I'm trying to ask isn't what did it sell for? One of the first questions I'm asking is, when did it last sell and how often does it sell? Because frequency matters. A card that sells every week gives us lots of information. A card that sells once every 6 months gives us less information, although the fact that it sells once every 6 months is information in itself. And this leads to one of the most important concepts that I've come across so far, which is liquidity. Liquidity is a term that you hear a lot of people use. Some of them understand it, some of them don't. But effectively, liquidity is how easy it is to buy or sell something. Some cards are incredibly liquid. Lionel Messi, for me, on the football side of things, is a liquid asset. Okay, people are always looking to buy Lionel Messi, and it's relatively easy compared to other athletes to sell Lionel Messi. Steph Curry, Darth Vader, there are buyers everywhere for these kinds of cards, right? Sales happen constantly. Pricing is relatively transparent. It makes it easier to price these kinds of cards because they have repeated sales and it gives you that anchor point. But others are not. Some cards are so niche that even if they are valuable, and they might be valuable, finding a buyer could take months. I have a complete set of numbered to 299 Star Wars Celebration cards that fit this description. They're niche. I think they're valuable, but finding a buyer could take a long time. Now, that's not necessarily bad, but it does change how much confidence we should have in the data. So think about two cards, right? Card A has sold 20 times in the last 3 months. Card B has sold once. Which market data do you trust more? Well, obviously it's card A, right? Because there's more evidence, there's more data. And the next thing I've started paying attention to is trend direction. This is where graphs do become useful. Most people look at a graph and ask the simple question, is the graph going up or is the graph going down? It's not a terrible question, but it's not the best question. The better question to ask is, why is it going up or down? Because prices rarely move in isolation. Maybe a player won an award. Maybe they transferred clubs. Maybe they have rumors of transferring clubs. Maybe they got injured. Maybe an influencer who has never met the footballer before did a reel about why you should buy their cards. Maybe a major tournament is coming up. Maybe the entire hobby is moving up, actually. The graph shows the result, and anyone can read that graph, more or less. But the real work is understanding the cause, and this matters because sometimes people mistake temporary excitement for permanent growth. So a card doubles in price. Everybody gets excited. People start talking about a breakout. But if the entire movement was driven by a tournament or a playoff run or a social media moment, that growth might not be sustainable. And that's why context matters as much as price. Now let's talk about one of my favorite mistakes that I like to make, which is anchoring. and I do this all the time. Let's say a card sold for £1,000 last year, but today it sells for £600. Now, most collectors will look at those 2 data points and say, well, it's down £400. Must be cheap. But that's not actually what the data says. The data only says it sold for £1,000 once, and it sold for £600 closer to today. Everything else is a story that we're telling ourselves to justify our own ends, right? Maybe £600 is a bargain. Maybe the £1,000 sale was completely irrational. It was FOMO. Maybe the market got ahead of itself. Maybe the current price is the current price. Maybe that £600 was a distressed sale. So somebody was looking to pay rent and sold their card below comps because the cash was worth more to them at that point than the card was. But the graph can't answer any of that for us. And that's where I think many of us get into trouble. We don't analyze the data. We compare data to our expectations. And those are very different activities. Another thing I'm learning is that volume matters. So imagine 2 scenarios, right? In the first, a card rises from £100 to £150 on 20 sales. In the second scenario, a card rises from £100 to £150 on 1 sale. Same thing happened. But these situations are not equally convincing. The first suggests broad market agreement, right? The second could be one overly enthusiastic buyer or somebody who's had 2 glasses of wine too many on a Thursday night. That's why volume and frequency are so important. They help us determine whether or not we're looking at a market trend or an isolated event. Then there's the issue of outliers. Now, outliers are sales that don't really represent the market. Maybe 2 bidders got carried away. Maybe the auction ended at the perfect time. Maybe the card was unusually attractive. Maybe the listing was poor. And maybe, and I put my tin foil hat on for this one, maybe the sale was made by a pair of friends to try and juice the market to show that the market was going somewhere, and in reality it wasn't. Outliers happen constantly. The mistake there is treating every sale as equally meaningful, because they aren't. Some sales tell us a lot. Some sales tell us almost nothing. And part of becoming better at reading data is learning the difference, differentiating the signal from the noise. Another thing I've noticed is people often confuse price with demand. A high price doesn't mean strong demand. Sometimes it means low supply. Sometimes it means a small number of highly motivated buyers. Sometimes it means 2 highly motivated buyers. Sometimes it means temporary hype. Real demand is often easier to spot through repeated transactions, that volume piece. People consistently buying, consistently competing, consistently returning to a market. That's different from a single eye-catching sale. And honestly, that's one of the biggest lessons I think I've learned from studying the data so far. Big numbers attract attention, but patterns create understanding. The last thing I want to talk about is certainty, because Card Ladder can make us feel more certain than where we should be. If I'm going to get sponsored by Card Ladder, I've got to learn to pronounce it properly. Card Ladder can make us feel more certain than we should be. The graphs look professional, the numbers look precise, the sales are real, it brings it all together in a nice interface. They look after people that they sponsor, but the markets are still uncertain. The data doesn't predict the future. It helps us understand the present. Now, that's a huge distinction, right? We're not trying to become fortune tellers. We're trying to make better decisions with the information that's available, and that's a more realistic goal. So if I'm summarizing what I've learned so far, it's this. Don't focus on one sale, so look for multiple sales. Don't focus only on the price. Look at the frequency. Don't focus only on the graphs. Consider the explanations. And don't assume previous highs represent fair value, and don't mistake data for certainty. Remember, I think the biggest lesson for all of this is the only price that actually matters is what somebody is willing to pay for your card. It's only worth something if somebody actually buys it. The more I learn about card markets, the more I think the goal isn't finding perfect information, it's avoiding the obvious mistakes. So in the next episode, I want to tackle something that confuses almost every collector at some point, which is population reports. If you've ever heard anybody say the pop is too high, look at the gem rate, pop 1, things like that, and you quietly pretended that you knew what they meant, you're not alone on that. Thanks for watching.